She was, again, on the Governor's Education Advisory Board, Deputy Commissioner, member of the Governor's State Job Training Council, member of the National Science Foundation, member of Heartland Scholarship for member of Governor's School to Work Council, Administrator, Department of Labor, Eastern Oklahoma, and the list goes on and on. So she is well-grounded and experienced, and we're honored to have her. She's not only going to be speaking for us now, but she also will be meeting together with a core. I'm going to give an appeal. I'll let you think about it now. If you are not just interested in education, but you have a burden, you've either been an educator, a teacher, an education administrator, or connected with the education arena, or you have what you know to be a spirit-inspired burden for education reform, then you're going to be invited to join us for a second session upstairs at the end of today's program, where she will give us some tips and some cues on how to be most effective in interfacing with the education system and having a direct impact upon it. So it's our blessing to have her here. Let's welcome Linda Murphy. Bless you, Linda. The clock is on.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to lay this down because I have notes. If you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll get louder. I really appreciate being here today, and I am so excited and thankful to see the community of Tulsa, Christian community, and even people who are not Christians who have common sense wake up and pay attention to what's happening in our schools. I know a lot of us as Christians have heard, let's just have choice and forget public ed. I've heard that. I don't know if you've heard that. Let's get all of the money into choice. The problem with that is choice means charter schools, and if vouchers should pass in the state, it means money going into a private school or for vendors. The government regulates all of that, folks. It's government money. This is what people don't think about, and if we don't start cleaning up all over charter schools, we've got some problems. I think we've seen that with the EPIC audit. We've seen that we have a money problem there. I'm not against EPIC. I'm not against the founders. I think they did a lot of great things, but we needed more transparency. We didn't need $25, $30 million in profit going to individuals from public money. That is just not going to work. And I basically warned them of that before the audit was ever done, that there would be some reckoning over the need for transparency. Okay, so I'm surprised I'm starting with this, but I'm telling the Lord to put in my mouth what He wants me to say. We are the people in the earth. If we are God's children and we obey Him and we're walking in that light, then we have the kingdom within us. The kingdom is within, and it will be manifest more and more outwardly. We don't know the exact timing. I'm not going to tell you doctrine and theology that you may or may not agree with, but I think generally we can all agree with that. And we know that the true gospel is based on the Lord Jesus Christ as the way and the only way. And we have a lot of ecumenicalism going on. It's affecting education. It's affecting state policy. Some people are getting into what I would just call Christian humanitarianism, which is not Christianity. In fact, we're going to pay for all that with tax dollars, and it's more bondage. And Jesus said, I came to set the captives free. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So we've got to get our doctrine right. We've got to get in the Word, stay in the Word every day, every week, and more so as these troubling things occur around us. And it's getting more complicated. People I like, people I love, getting off, I believe, of the gospel message and thinking they're doing a good thing, and they're in a works situation. If the Lord doesn't put it in your spirit and you just think it's a great idea to do for God, that's works, folks. And I know you all understand that here, and I can speak very plainly. Because the Lord will build the church. He added to it from the beginning. On the day of Pentecost, we know, He added the new ones that came in. He gave them a way to hear and understand the gospel in their own language. And we know that if we read the Word and see that. So I'm going to start out. We've mentioned already Elena, my dear sweet friend, and I'm so thankful for her and her obedience to the Lord, her courage and her demeanor and her radiance as she serves on the board. And that Spirit of the Lord comes through her into that room, which is not easy to do. I've been at the state capitol. I was in Governor Keating's office. He appointed me Secretary of Ed in 94. In November, I ran in 94 in November. I ran for state superintendent, got 49.5% of the vote statewide. The night of the election, only our race stopped. The totals for our race for state superintendent in 94 did not get in the night of the election. Every other statewide race was totaled and reported. What happened? How can it happen? Because all statewide races are on the same ballot. The same ballot, folks. Any state office was on the ballot. Years later, I spoke to John Fund at the Wall Street Journal at a conference, and he said, that can't happen. He was writing a book on voter fraud. And I did not give him my story and did not name names in a public way because some of those folks are still around. And some are in the Republican Party. Okay? And I know that, and I knew that then. And I was told later, different ones that would come against me, so-and-so told me to do this, and I knew that. So, at any rate, you have to have the joy of the Lord. That is our strength. The peace of the Lord, so you can think straight. You go into those meetings and have to make decisions or make statements. If you don't have the peace of the Lord in you, you're just going to get rattled because they will pull your chains and push the buttons every way they can. I say they, and I'm talking about the enemies of the Lord God that come against that which is right and good for our children. And we know the Word of God tells us that anyone that harms a child would be better off that a millstone be put around their neck and thrown in to drown. Because that is an evil thing in the earth that we see happening. Okay, we talked about this person, and he's not the only one in the world, and he's not the only one in our state. There's another one that's been equally activist, vile, defiant in the face of law, in the face of legislative mandates. And this person, Tyler Wryn, W-R-Y-N, is at Will Rogers High School. He's the English language arts teacher. And Jesse also talked about some of his activities at Owasso. But I want to read one statement. He's made a lot of statements. But right now, to start in talking about education specifics, Tyler Wryn said, and it's on video, reported by Veritas, which went out all over the nation. He said, eventually, you want to remove Christianity, religion, from progressive thought, because religion is inherently hierarchical. You bet it's hierarchical. The Lord God is at the top. And it was Satan himself who was cast from heaven because he tried to raise up against God, over God. That's a hierarchy. That's what this man is talking about. Okay, so there's a very clear anti-Christian statement. He made others. I'll get back to him in a minute. But I'm just going to say that thank God we've got social media. It can be a horrible instrument used by people wrongly, and I've experienced some of that. And they get their wrong message or false accusations out there broad and far. But like Winston Churchill said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. And that happens sometimes because you don't know where that lie is going to come from or how quick it's going to get out there, what kind of microphone that person may have to broadcast it. Okay, so you go on. You may be cast down, but you are not destroyed. And the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, nor against the people of God who are the church in the earth. My dad was a Free Will Baptist minister, so I grew up a preacher's kid. And I lived in different parts of Oklahoma. I was born in Cheyenne, way out west. I graduated high school there later, was there the last 3 years of high school. Went to college in Weatherford, Southwestern. And I'm from that rural, very conservative part of the state. I'm not saying we don't have conservatives all over the state, we do. But that's been a real bastion of conservatism. I don't know what we're going to see in the upcoming election because of what's going on. That's a whole other story. But I won the western half of the state in '94. I got 60% of the vote in Enid and Woodward and where I'm from in Cheyenne, in that area. There were senators that lost their seats because they would not support my confirmation when Governor Keating appointed me Secretary of Ed in December of '94. I ran in November, and then a month later he appointed me Secretary of Education. There was a 2-day hearing at the state capitol. It was hellfire and brimstone coming against me from folks. Gene Stipe, the dark prince of the Senate that was there 50 years, Little Dixie, Gene Stipe, was in the hearing. He stood there behind the committee chair, Ed Long from Enid, and put his hands on the back of this chair and leaned forward. Body language tells you a lot, doesn't it? And those Democrats knew they had better not vote for me because some of them had said to the press the day before they thought I would be a great liaison for parents and teachers, and they were about ready to vote for me. One was Penny Williams. She probably got, a little feedback on that. But she was on the committee, so there were 12 Democrats, 5 Republicans. The Democrats all voted against me. Republicans all voted for me. They had a fiery 2-day hearing. They brought people in I didn't know, I'd never met, never seen them before, that testified against me. But they had some blazing things to say. And one of them was the PTA leader at a school that's in a very liberal, I'll not get into all of that, but that area is kind of notorious there. But she stood there and she was just shaking and sweating and perspiring, pardon me, red-faced and quite shook. And she said, we cannot have her in there. She said it would be like having the fox in the hen house. She said, you know what we do with foxes. I'd say that's a threat. Around here we have, shotgun. We shoot the fox if they get in the hen house, right? Or some people do that. I think that's what she meant. So that was that. I didn't intend to get into the political arena. I didn't want to. It wasn't my plan. And God keeps that in my mind because I know it's not me. I didn't want to give up a wonderful career that I had. You heard a little bit of my work background. I had an opportunity to get my doctorate at NSU in optometry. I'd worked in that field after I taught. I kept my certification as a teacher because I was in an area that I did consulting in schools for vision and learning development. I traveled all over the United States for a foundation out of Santa Ana, California, speaking about vision and learning development to doctors, to vision therapists, to teachers. And it was a career that, it's a unique niche, like a lot of great careers are. It's a niche that people don't really understand. I'll tell you just real quick, a lot of the students I had that were labeled learning disabled or other visual or other learning problems actually had a visual problem that had never been found because they had 20/20 eyesight. 20/20 just means at 20 feet you see clearly. You see normally at 20 feet. But when you read, when you write, when you do math, you're doing that at near. And your eyes have to start and stop on the place you need to look and then sweep. These are muscle controls. You have 6 muscles around each eye. They're extraocular. Inside the eye, there's a muscle that focuses the lens. So this is all about motor development, child development, and a lot of people in the medical field do not understand that. And so they do an eyesight test at 20 feet and say they've got perfect vision. No, they've got perfect eyesight at 20 feet, but they do not have perfect vision, which is a whole process. Okay, so I'm talking about something that I got into, and my plan was to get my doctorate at NSU. My husband drove to Tulsa. We lived in Fort Gibson. We bought a house there. My dad lived at Tahlequah at the time. Like I said, he was a pastor at a small country church up there at Rose, Oklahoma, actually. But, tiny, tiny country church. But anyway, we lived in Fort Gibson. I had planned to get my doctorate. I had a 1-year-old at home, which was a surprise kiddo. And we knew it wasn't a good idea for me to get real involved in college for hours and hours every week and tied up. So I wanted to give him some time with me at home and not be away from him. So I was at home. I was appointed by the principal to be on a school committee. And when I got on that committee, I found out that we were a pilot school, one of 10 in the state, for outcomes-based education. And I'll just tell you what it is. Basically, it's the big sister or the big brother of Common Core. It came along in the early 90s. It was the Clinton administration, and we had a weakened academic focus. I presented a white paper to the Board of Regents of Higher Ed when Chancellor Brish was the Chancellor of Higher Ed, and he absolutely agreed with me. When I left the room, he came to me and he said, "Let's talk." He said, "I came from Germany and when I was 17 years old, and you are right, what you're talking about." But he said, "You're dealing with Tammany Hall, trying to get things done and changed." And Tammany Hall, if you know the history of New York, of the United States, the big union headquarters where you don't get a job if you don't go to them, and it's kind of like our Gene Stipe deal in Little Dixie. Okay, if you knew Gene Stipe and loved him, that's fine, because I know people that knew him and loved him. But his political power and come here for controlling things is what I'm talking about. Okay, so I got on this committee and I found out that we were supposed to be minions and not think outside of the relationships in that room where we all would come to consensus and agree and write a mission statement and a vision statement. This was before internet, before email, before Facebook. So I had radio, some TV. I didn't get anything really there occasionally, but radio. There was Marlon Maddox out of Dallas, Texas. I don't know if you know Marlon. Kirby Anderson does that program, Point of View. But Marlon Maddox was doing a fantastic job there in the early 90s, reporting what was going on in education, in these philosophical things with environmentalism, the Gaia worship, the Earth summits that were going on that we now have in the UN programs, 2030 programs, sustainability and all that. And education is part of it. If you don't know that, UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, is a branch of the UN. Ronald Reagan got us out of it. George W. Bush put us back in. Okay. So there is a World Core curriculum before Common Core that's been around since the 80s at least, and a man named Robert Mueller, and they also have spiritualism involved in it. So all of this has really, behind the scene, behind the curtains, there's a spiritual component that is well known by those that want to control and do social engineering to get everyone into the same mindset. And that's really what they were doing on the committee that I was appointed to. It was facilitated by the superintendent who had been trained to facilitate to get consensus. He was a former accreditation officer from the State Department of Education, and he knew what we were doing. And nobody else did as far as accreditation and how that was going to work. But I found the pilot, I asked for the pilot application, I read that. I went to the state law, read through that. This pilot application said that we would be fulfilling the mandates of House Bill 1017. Okay, so this was a part of 1017. And so that would be rolled out all across the state. So the first real clue to me was, as far as this plan, why would you pilot something that you've already mandated? You shouldn't mandate, put in law, something that you haven't yet piloted. You pilot things, it's like research before you give a vaccine. Does that sound familiar? Okay. It's false science. And we're building the ship as we travel in it across the ocean. And the ship's got holes in it, and some of us are trying to throw the water out, patch up the holes, and go the other way. And that's what that was like. So on that committee, I would not agree to the mission statement and the vision statement, which is where we started, because I said it needs academics in it. This is a K-12 school. It's been successful. We have kids going to college here. Let's have academics in the vision statement and the mission statement. Well, the superintendent kept trying. He had a meeting at the lunchroom where he had the public turn out, about 200 people in the middle of the day during the week when they were at work and they took off, and they weren't happy because he set it up that way, and they had to miss work, and some of them missed pay to be there. And it blew up in his face trying to push this on through, although some of us, it was me first, and then a friend who was on the board started seeing it. At first he said, "Oh no, everything's fine, everything's fine." Then he started asking questions and started getting pushback and started seeing it. As long as you're going with the flow, hey, you're the best friend. You know, you're the good buddy, you're the smartest one in the room, and you're favored, highly favored. And so people started coming to him saying, "Do you get it now? Do you get it now?" And he was like, "I can't believe they're saying that to me." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You're not supposed to do something different." But it was, students will be prepared for global citizenship. They'll be prepared to be citizens in the 21st century. And this was coming out of our State Department of Ed, coordinating these things, which they didn't even understand. They sent a man from the State Department of Ed who was supposed to be the Division of Outcomes-Based Education. He was over it all. He had supposedly used a model at his school already, and he couldn't answer any questions. He came to the second meeting, which was in the auditorium, the week of Thanksgiving, like on a Tuesday night before the Thanksgiving on Thursday. But people showed up. There were probably 350. They had all the teachers there to support this, but they didn't know what it was either. And they were calling me saying, "Linda, do you know what this is?" And I would talk to them. I had substituted there. I had not taught there. I had the 1-year-old at home, so I knew a lot of them. And one day the superintendent stood up at our meeting, our committee, and he wrote a mission statement on the board, and he said, "Here, what do you think about this one?" on the whiteboard. And I just raised my hand. I'm just like, okay, I'm going full blast here. Raised my hand. I said, "Earl, I read that last night, and it's from Aurora, Colorado." He said, "You're right, Linda. It is." He had already been through 2 meetings with us, hundreds of people all over town, because we took flyers up and down Main Street. Some business people got wind and understood what we were talking about, myself and this school board member, and he was a business owner, so he knew all of them. I was new there. I'd only been there a couple of years. So that kind of, made some people like, well, we're going to trust the ones we've known 30 years, and they're all in for this. The middle school superintendent wrote a paper called something like this: Jesus Christ, the greatest proponent of OBE. Okay, outcomes-based education says we will now focus on equal outcomes, not equal opportunity. There's the flip. My paper I entitled Paradigm Shift Undermines Academics. But not only was it academics undermined, where the top is brought down lower, some of the top level science and math classes were literally taken out of some schools. The curriculum, the teaching, some of these things have been added back. I get that, and it's different in different places. Some places have held on to an academic structure, especially the smaller schools. And that's one reason I've never been for consolidating small schools into big schools. That's where we have the problems. Tulsa, God bless you, Elena, going into the lion's den there. But you know where it's safe. In the lion's den, if the Lord is with you, that's where you need to be. If that's where you're supposed to be. So this radical, and our superintendent said we're going to make a radical change. That was another. I think that actually is what I heard first that alarmed me. A radical change? Well, what is that? So I got materials. I got a file from the principal who had appointed me. She was already regretting it, by the way. Here I was thinking and reading and asking questions and making comments. What's wrong with this person? She's new. She doesn't know yet. She's got to love us and worship at the idol of the school. Don't cause problems because you're causing trouble for our community. You're affecting economic development. You're affecting big plans by big philanthropists in Tulsa who have big money, billionaires, multi-billionaires paying in to create a system for workforce training, and they don't care how many broom pushers they have because of low academics, because this is really focused around economic plans, and we need a lot of workers on that level. That is true. That sounds radical. I can show you proof of that. Coming from the Federal Department of Labor, the Office of Civil Rights, on some of this equity stuff, we've got problems there. Okay, but back to this situation. So here I was on this committee, and when I did that, I was really challenging. And the academics, I don't remember how we ended up writing the mission and vision statement, but from that point, the State Department of Ed was sending people out across the state to do area meetings to explain why we needed, this system and how it was so good. And at that meeting, I took the mic off. They had a 1-minute clock where they timed you down, 1 minute, and then you sit down. You're not supposed to look at the audience. You look at the panel, which was a PR firm out of Tulsa that Sandy Garrett had hired, and they were on the stage with her at Woodward, at Lawton, I don't remember where all, in Muskogee, Tulsa. That PR firm was taking notes and, taking public input. You've heard of public input, right? So then we can say everybody wants this. And so I took the mic off the stand and turned around and said, I'll tell you what this is. And I spent about 2 minutes, and it broke out in applause because those people already knew it was coming into our school already, and they were very upset at what they were seeing because students were being told to work in groups. And they got a group grade. And they didn't get through the algebra book. My daughter was one in high school. There was curriculum coming out that was death education to help children be prepared when someone in their family dies. And so they took them to graveyards. We didn't do that where I was, but it was done. They asked questions on surveys. They were on paper then. We didn't have the online like we do now, where sometimes we don't even get to catch what's getting sent out. And our mental health department did one this past year asking for the gender choices of the child. Are you a they, them? Are you it? No, not it, pardon me. It's a pronoun. She, he, It is so ridiculous. And yet, this is getting into the area that as an educator I was trained in. It's called affective domain, attitudes, values, and beliefs. But we do not touch that with regular ed. If you had a child, I taught special ed, so I was trained in that in behavior modification. But I had conservative Christian professors. I had supervisors that were the same and administrators up until that point. And we didn't do that. What we did was, with parental consent, do further testing, and then we would find goals to work on for their behavior. Like Johnny that threw the chairs across the room every week, pick up a chair and throw it across the room. That's a behavior problem that we needed the affective domain. How do we reach this child and work for what we now call social emotional learning? Okay, when George Bush put No Child Left Behind in, that made everything special ed. No Child Left Behind created what is called response to intervention, and that's for every child. So behavioral, it all started coming in then. And then we got Obama. We have President Obama. We got a lot. Race to the Top, Common Core came through under him. And there were Republicans and Democrats too. When Mary Fallon was elected governor, she went right along with that same agenda that was in place, which was under Brad Henry, Democrat, and Sandy Garrett, Democrat, who was there still 20 years after I ran against her in '94. She was there 20 years because we didn't have term limits until the end of her time. So we got Janet Barisi, we got, Mary Fallon, and they brought Jeb Bush in a number of times. Jeb Bush is really the center of Common Core around the country. And he was defeated very much because of Common Core. I know President Trump certainly took him out of the debate on stage, but the Common Core backlash was following him all over the United States. And that's because Common Core came along with the same thing, a less academic focus and focusing on the attitudes, values, and beliefs, emotions, feelings of children. As Christians, we know that the soul is the mind, the will, and the emotions. Our mind, will, and emotions are to be saved if we're a Christian. They're to be washed in the water of the Word, that our mind will focus on Christ and we will become like Him in our thinking, our mindset. We will have the mind of Christ. These scriptures are all there. You can find them. I know you probably know them. So we know that our soul is precious and it must be made holy. So what we've got going on now, just immediately right now, and I've just got a minute here, but I'm going to try to hurry. There are 5 steps that I wrote down the other day and shared with people. How many children are becoming transgender? 5 steps to sex change in children. Number 1, child, and I'll leave a copy of this, and if you want to copy it for people later, you can, but number 1, child sees or hears about transgender sex change. See it or hear it. There are library books. One just this week that popped up out of Jinx. Popped up, a parent found it, and they're exposing these as they should. It was presented to the school board there. It has all kinds of things in it, not just the transgender sex change ideology. Other things, critical race theory, patriarchy, opposition, which means, again, the head of the household. I don't know if any of you remember or know, I think a lot of you may, Dean Gocher, who was from Tulsa, and Dean is a friend of mine. He's been here many times. He was here in college. He was at ORU, lived here. And he's been in Kansas for some time. But anyway, I've had Dean do meetings, and if you go to his website, authorityresearch.com, there's a lot there that is beneficial if you want a deeper understanding on some of this, as far as philosophy and how we have this in education. Okay, number 1, the child sees or hears about transgender sex change through their family. Some children have this in their family, and they are taught to accept and appreciate and maybe even celebrate that family member that is a transgender person. Okay, through friends, through classmates, through cartoons, through books, through movies, social media, or school. Not all schools. We've got 550 public schools across this state. I guarantee you, I know people in a lot of these schools where they do none of this. They wouldn't even think about it. And we need to support those people. And like that teacher in Bixby, where she stood up with the principal pushing this, Linda Hayes, I know you may know her, and said, we've got pre-K through second grade teacher training set for LGBTQ ideology. So why would teachers at that level need to know? Because they're supposed to promote this, extend this. Our State Department of Ed under Joy Hoffmeister has done several things. If I had time, I'd tell you exactly some things. Okay, number 2. So 1, they see or hear it. They then, and in an acceptable way, if it's in a library book and colorful pictures, this little cartoon-looking library book that I just saw this week. Okay, number 2, the child feels, fears, or thinks that he or she may be in the wrong body. That's an idea out there. They're in the wrong body. So then they're distressed. They go to the counselor. They're referred to the counselor. That's number 3. Do you see how easily this happens? Then at the counselor, if you have an affirming counselor, which means they cannot talk against sex change, they cannot talk about choose your gender. If they are going along with that, then they are affirming that child in their wrong ideology. And if they go to a psychiatrist, which the counselor can refer them to, then they get a medical diagnosis which labels them gender dysphoria, with gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoric, but the category is gender dysphoria. It's in the DSM. It's in the Doctor's Statistical Manual, which is like the Bible of medical coding, medical diagnosis for mental health. Okay? That's what they do next. And then the child is referred to a medical doctor for transition to opposite sex via chemical treatment and or medical procedure. Now, I'm not saying that happens with every child. You can see that at any point in those 5 steps, if there's an intervention of common sense of support to love that child, not condemning the child, but not celebrating and helping them go to the next level of transitioning, pushing that, which is what is being promoted. Okay, there is a theory which is on the college level, like critical race theory has come out of the university, and law. Critical race theory. And it's all about equity. They call it diversity, equity, inclusion, that we're going to include everyone, but they really mean if you don't think like we think about you white people being racist, me, all of us who are white, then we are not thinking right because it's inherent and it's systemic. It's in our systems, our institutions. So they're promoting people not based on ability, not based on accomplishment, not based on skill level. I'm saying people that really get into this deep. Then they just promote them because we've got to get equity here. We don't have enough black people, we don't have enough, Chinese people or whatever. Not really Chinese, they are getting discriminated too, but because of the college level. So this is a preconditioning that's going on for accepting gender identity or a choice to be made. It's occurring now even at birth with adults imposing non-binary, meaning you're not either sex, you're non-binary, training for babies, which supporters say gives the child freedom to explore and not have sexual identity imposed on them by others. So it's a rebellion against God, it's a rebellion against the family, and it's a rebellion against us. We've got to fight it. Thank you so much.